Hey everyone, today we are solving driver from HackTheBox, an easy-rated Windows machine. I've run rustscan here, which is effectively a port scanner which tells us what services are running on the machine externally, meaning basically what ports are open, meaning basically what can we talk to, for example a web application or a file transfer protocol server, FTP server, so that kind of thing. I've used the arguments here, basically just using mmap command, so sc for default scripts, sv for enumerated versions, and on to output to a file. Very similar, very simple. This is a TCP scan, so basically it will just cover the majority of the TCP ports. I have also ran a UDP scan, very much the same, except it just uses this flag instead. Same sort of output here, we have these ports and these ports open on both. I'm going to focus on the TCP one since they had the enumerated versions flag set, so I'll go ahead and look at these first. Okay, so when I say ports, what I mean again is a service. For example, here we have 80 running on this IP. This is the IP of the machine. We have 135, 445, 5985. Now, what do these mean? Well, if we go ahead and scroll down a little bit, we can see that 80 is HTTP, which basically means a web server. So when I say web server, I mean like google.com or facebook.com, that kind of thing. You know, when you go to the website itself. Then we have 135 and 445. These are basically Windows services used for what's called NetBIOS or SMB. They do some other bits too, but mainly that's what they do. What this basically means is it can be a share, which means you can store files on there that machines can then pull from your machine if they have the credentials. And then basically it's just used to transfer files really from a Windows system to another Windows system, or Linux system as well. Basically it's just used for file transferring and that kind of thing. And then on top of that, we have 5985, which doesn't tell us much about it, but I know from experience that this tends to be what's called the WinRM port. So basically what it means is if we have credentials and our account is part of the remote users group, it means that we can most likely log into the machine with the credentials remotely. Okay, so let's take a look at the web application that we have up here. So when it comes to web app enumeration, I first of all would run whatweb, which will tell me basically what kind of server we're dealing with. So here I can see here, we have driver, we're getting a 401 when we try to talk to it. We have a Microsoft IIS, and we have powered by PHP. So in reflection of that, I have adjusted my word list to basically be very standard. So I'm using GoBuster here, and what this will do basically is it will brute force directories on the web server, just so we can understand more about what's on there, what kind of files there are, directories, and that kind of thing. The reason I use these three is because we have common, so for example, common files, we have a large number of files, and then we have directories as well. Basically covers the majority of what we would expect to see, which is a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Go ahead and run through. While it's running through, let's go ahead and look at the web application, okay? The web application is prompting us for a password. Now, what it's basically saying is we need to authenticate to the web application. This is using what's called HTTP basic authentication. I did a video on that in my Web Hackers Fundamental series, basically explaining how it works, but really what it's wanting is a username and password. Now, interesting enough, it says here, please enter password for admin. So we have an admin user account, okay? And very commonly an admin will have, say, a password of, say, admin, or like login, or password, or something like that. I just guessed password I just guessed the password of admin, and that let me straight through. Cool. So now we're on to some web application. Basically, what that means is now we're on the web application. We now have access to some quote unquote admin functionalities, perhaps. Cool. So let's go ahead and enumerate the web application a little bit further. When it comes to enumerating a web application, it's important to understand what the web application does. For example, here we can see that this application here is MFP Firmware Update Center. We, as part of the Center of Excellence, conduct various tests on multiple functional printers, such as testing firmware updates, drivers, etc. So basically, they work with printers. Interesting. Go ahead over to About. This doesn't work. Go ahead over to Firmware Updates, and we get a page. Select Printer Model and upload the respective firmware update to our file share. Our testing team will review the uploads manually and initiate testing soon. Okay, interesting. So we have a few options here, and we have an ability to load a file. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and create a file. So it doesn't say what kind of file we want, so we'll go ahead and just create one, basically. Go ahead and create a new tab here. And we'll just echo, say, hello to just file.txt. Very simple. Now we go over to here, browse, go to driver, file.txt. Go ahead and hit submit. Okay, that seemed to have worked. Don't know. Nothing really happened. we'll go ahead and change this to say file.php. Since the application's run in PHP, it's important to try and use the same language they're using. Let's go ahead and run it. Okay, that seems to have worked as well. No obvious error. We can see here message equals success, although we can't see anything other than that. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my GoBuster now, because GoBuster will hopefully have found something. For some reason, my GoBuster was a little bit behind. But basically, it's going to go ahead and enumerate the directories. And in this case, although I'm jumping ahead a little bit, basically it doesn't find anything other than, say, image.php and index.php. This is because, first of all, we need authentication. Second of all, there isn't an uploads directory that we can see directly. And you'd see that if the Buster had finished a little bit early. But unfortunately, for some reason, it didn't run. But that's okay. So where do we go from here? Well, let's go ahead and reread this top line. Now, you're obviously not going to have, say, hints in real life, but you are going to have intuition. You know, just because it says what it says here doesn't mean that you're going to have that in real life. However, your intuition might imply, okay, I'm uploading a driver, and we know that their team reviews the drivers. How can we exploit that? So let's go ahead and read it again. So it says our testing team will, says here, select print model and upload the respective firmware update to our file share. Our testing team will review the uploads manually and initiate the testing soon. So basically what that means is someone's going to review the files we upload on the file share. So I basically Googled, I think I Googled something like Windows Explorer attacks. And when I Googled this, this basically gave me a link to what's called SCF file attacks, basically. So what this basically means is, if we go ahead and view the page, it's basically saying that if we upload a certain file, an SCF file, when a user goes to browse to it, as they will, as it says here, manually, it will then execute on their system. Now, this may or may not work. In many cases, it's obviously just worth trying if it's going to work or not. We've already tried a PHP file, we've already tried a text file, so we can probably upload an SCF file. But we'll find out. I'm going to go ahead and take this now. We'll copy this. We'll go ahead and create a new file. Go ahead and move to here. We'll just call it code pwn.scf. Cool. Give that a second to load. Go ahead and paste it in here. So we need to adjust some things. We need to go ahead and put in our IP. So my IP in this case is 10.10.14.4. Okay, cool. So 10.10.14.4. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and change this to pwn because that's the file share I'm going to be using, and we'll go ahead and hit save. Cool. And I'm going to go ahead and use InPacket's SMB server to get this working. What this will do is it will basically open up an SMB share that when we go ahead and browse to it, it will then go ahead and basically share the file. However, what I'm more curious about actually is using a tool called Responder. So this will open up an SMB share that will refer directly to our path here. But to be honest with you, I'm not massively fussed about that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead and use a responder. Like so. What this will do basically is it will just listen for the same SMB request that was made via the InPacket version of SMB server. But in this case, what it will do is it will actually just give us the hash when it gets dropped. It will basically do the same thing with the SMB server, but I prefer Responder as it seems to just be better at catching this kind of stuff. Anyways, we'll go ahead and upload this. So we'll go ahead over to browse, go to pwn.scf, go ahead and hit submit. We'll see how that goes. Okay, boom. So we're getting some requests from 10.10.11.106. Basically what that means is the remote host, as in this system here, has viewed our SCF file located here, which has then loaded an icon, which is located on our remote system. And when a Windows machine authenticates via SMB, it will basically access with its current computer credentials. In this case, Tony is logged into the computer, and therefore it has used his credentials. However, it has not used his credentials in plain text, it's used his credentials in what's called a NetNTLMv2 hash. We can simply just take this hash and save it to our file. So code hash. We'll go ahead and save this to a file now. We'll now go ahead and use hashcat to crack this hash, but we don't know what mode hashcat requires for us to crack the hash. So we need to go ahead and figure that one out. So we'll use hashcat and we'll grep by NTLM like so. This will say that we have two versions. So we want the NetNTLMv2 version. I'm going to go ahead and add in the A flag and add in 5. So it will basically just give us the last few bits. We can see here mode 56,000. That's all we want. So we want to go hashcat /m 56,000, like so. Hashcat mode 56,000 hash, and then basically optimize it and then use this word list. I'm going to go ahead and just remove that hash bit there. That should now work. Give it a second. We should then have a hash returned. A hash was returned. We can see here it says cracked here. And if you look here, we have Tony and a password of Lil Tony. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep note of this. So we have Tony and Lil Tony. So let's refer back to where we were before, in the sense of we have the port 5985 open, which is often called WinRM. Let's go ahead and Google, actually. Go ahead and just Google this. Go ahead and Google this, and then we'll type in, say, remote. Basically, WinRM. And WinRM will basically let us log into WinRM. So we can go ahead and use a tool called Evil-WinRM, like so. Go ahead and clear all this out of the way. So we'll go ahead. This is on my previous machine I did. This will be driver.htb. Go ahead and then, so this H is actually for a hash. We don't want that though, so it's going to be Lil Tony. We'll change the H to be, I think it's P. And then we change this to be Tony. And then we just change this to be, in fact, it can probably just be like that. That might work. We'll find out. Okay, that works, and now we are Tony. If I do who am I, we have Tony. Sweet. So this next bit, you can skip ahead to where I show the printer solution. However, I'm going to go ahead and run through using Metasploit framework or MSF console to effectively migrate to an alternate process so we can see what exploits are available. I'll put the timestamps in the video for the part where I actually do the priv escalation to admin. However, this part here might just give you an insight into MSF console. So, as of current, I have a remote session. I'm currently running as Tony, okay? So what I'm curious about is how I can escalate to admin. Now, there are obviously a few ways you can do it. You can use a tool called WinPeas. I like WinPeas. But these easy machines tend to be more focused on exploits and very simple privescs. So I can run this, but at the same time, there's no absolute need to. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and use Metasploit's equivalent version, which will basically suggest exploits to use, because this is more reading of scripts. This is more reading of script output versus actually looking at exploits that are available. It's a great tool, don't get me wrong, but I've used it a few times and I would rather try and use the Metasploit version. Cool. So let's go ahead and use Metasploit. So I'm going to go ahead and boot up MSF console. If I can spell right. We'll go ahead and make this small. And make this small as well. Give that a second to boot. Cool. So I want to go ahead and search for web delivery. Cool. So basically I'm going to use user number 5, which basically is used to deliver a script remotely. This is just a nice way to basically just get your code on the machine and get a Meterpreter shell. So we'll go ahead and show options. This all looks okay. We need to go ahead and set the lhost, so set lhost. I'm going to do set g lhost, so it's a global set. 10, 10, 14, 4. Cool. We'll go ahead and do show targets. Basically, this is how the exploit is run. So, for example, you're running it via Python, PHP, PowerShell. In my case, I want to run via PowerShell, so we'll go set target to either targets or target. Not sure one of those. I did both though. Cool. That should now be okay. So we're using PowerShell. Looks fine to me. We're using the Python Meterpreter reverse TCP payload. I don't personally want to use that, so I'm going to go ahead and do show payloads. Cool. So this is basically all the payloads. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize it a bunch so we can see them all, because it does a bit of line wrapping that's annoying. So there's quite a lot here, but really what we're looking for from the top is a Meterpreter-based Windows reverse shell TCP. So there are a few ways here. So we have, like I say, a generic, a custom payload, like a generic one, bits and pieces. I'm not really interested in these. I'm more interested in the Meterpreter ones. And these ones don't have a preface of x64, meaning that it's, say, 32-bit, meaning it's, say, x86. I don't personally want one of those right now, because I've tried an x86 payload and that didn't work. It wouldn't ever call back to me properly, so we have to use an x64 payload, or just 64-bit in this case. We'll go ahead and scroll down a little bit more, and we'll see that we have a payload Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse HTTPS. I don't want that one, I want the reverse TCP. We'll go ahead and take this one. So 202 basically. Looks good to me. Reverse. Just checking how it's put together. So another thing to point out is we have what's called a staging shell and a staging reverse shell and a non-staged shell. Basically what it means is a staged reverse shell means that it will go ahead and it will execute, and then it will go ahead and pull down the remaining bits of the exploit, meaning the payload can be smaller. A non-staged shell means it basically sends it in one go. You send the entire shell in one go. This sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I want to use a staged shell, so it's just a bit easier in the sense of I can send a small amount of data and then let it pull down the rest. We want to go ahead and use 202 basically. So go ahead and set payload to be this. Cool, show options. Cool, I want to go ahead and hit run. Cool, we'll now go ahead and copy this PowerShell bit. Now go ahead and paste it into here. And now we can see here that we have some stuff happening. So here we have a Meterpreter session 1 opened from our remote system to the victim. Now we have the Meterpreter shell, we can now use Meterpreter-based payloads. For example, in this case, we can now use Meterpreter's exploits. So we can, for example, use the exploit suggester. Go ahead and just copy this now. Cool. So we now can go into sessions, and now we have the session Meterpreter x64 Windows. I want to then go use post multi-recon local exploit suggester. Cool. Set session as 1. And then hit run. What this will now do is it will now find exploits for 64-bit Windows exploits. So this will take a second. Cool, so we have a few exploits here. It's however important to make sure that you cover both sides of exploitation. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep in mind here. So we have these, we have Wizard Opium, Print Daemon, Privesk, Rico Driver Privesk, Token Magic. Cool. I'm now going to go ahead and type in PS. Wrong PS. I need to go ahead and now do sessions -i1 to basically drop into the Meterpreter session. Now do PS. What I want to do is I basically want to hook onto into a 32-bit process, so I can then run the same thing as I did before. The same enumerate exploits. So in this case, OneDrive here is running on this process ID, and it is x86, meaning that it's running on 32-bit. I'm going to go ahead and type in migrate to 4740. We're now migrating from our current process, which is Explorer, which is I think up here, to here, and now we are running as OneDrive basically. We're now basically injected into that process. Now we can then go to, I think it's background. Cool. We can now go to run again. And now this time we're looking for x86 exploits. This will basically give us an insight into what we can run from an x86 perspective. However, it's a point to refer to when we're looking at these processes. Actually, there's one that sticks out. Now, the web application kind of told us about it firsthand, that this is to do with printers and stuff. But also, if we look into the actual box itself, we also have a print spool running. So, somewhere in here. Yeah, spoolsv.exe. Let's go ahead and copy that. Let's go ahead and bung it into Google. Spoolsv runs on the Windows OS print spool service, yada yada yada. I'm actually getting recommended to type in exploit, even though I haven't typed that in. Detecting PrintNightmare exploits using trend micro, yada yada yada. Basically, what that means is because we have this service running, spool service, that it might be vulnerable to an exploit. Now, it is vulnerable to some exploits here. However, you'll notice that these are 2020 exploits, and this exploit here is from 2021. Maybe there's a CV I'm just missing on the page. I can't see it directly, but basically there's a 2021 exploit called PrintNightmare that we can go ahead and use. So there are multiple ways to exploit this. I'm going to go ahead and go down the route of doing it remotely using someone else's tool because I just think it's a lot cleaner and just nicer. We'll go ahead over to here. Basically, this exploits this PrintNightmare, although it does it remotely. It's a slight variation on the in-packet tool suite that will basically allow us to do all the work remotely, which is just a bit nicer. And what this does is it will sit on the local privilege escalation and the RC aspect of the vulnerability, basically meaning that we can go ahead and get RC as hopefully the administrator entity authenticate the entity auth user. I'm going to go ahead and just run these through, basically just to make sure that we have everything working. Sudo, and then we want to go ahead and add sudo into here. That should work. Yes. Give it a second. That has now worked, so we'll go ahead and see what the next steps are. So we want to go ahead and run the tool. So we'll go ahead. Oh, did not mean to click that. Go ahead and run the tool. cd into, just check where it actually stored it. We need to actually download the repo. My apologies. Go ahead and pull down the repo first because we actually don't have it yet. Git clone. I'll do. Cool. Now we cd into it. Cool. Now we can run Python 3. Cool. That's not what I want to run. Cool, that looks good to me. Okay, so what does it want from us? So there's some examples here. So this is a script. This is the system and the password. And then here we have a path to basically a DLL, which we can then use to then, this will then be executed basically by the remote system. So we need to go ahead and create a DLL. So go ahead and do that. Go ahead and just close this a little bit. So here I have my MSF Venom payload, or at least I did before it ran away from me, MSF Venom. So here we're asking for a 64-bit architecture, reverse shell on 10.10.14.4 on port 1338, and then basically as a DLL, because we need the DLL for it to work. Cool, I'm now going to go ahead and right click, go to horizontal. I'm going to go ahead and do SMB server. Basically that will just listen here. We'll now go ahead and run what we ran before. So we need to go ahead and then we need to see what it was. So it was the domain, so driver.htb / or / Tony lil Tony at 1010 at $box for me. Cool. At cool. And then we now need the path, so / 1010 14.4 / pwn.dll, I think it was called. I believe so. Go ahead and just check. Yeah, pwn.dll, cool. Now we need to go ahead and create a listener. So we'll go ahead and just move this up a little bit. Right click, go to here, shells 1338, hit enter. This now makes a request to our SMB server, and then we then get a reverse shell. We'll now do who am I, and we are entity authority system. So hopefully that makes sense. What we basically did is we exploited a vulnerability in the fact that spool svz is running on the machine. We then used this exploit here, written by Cube OXO. Basically it's a modified version that uses Python, and what that did is it then executed our malicious DLL remotely, which then allowed us to then get RCE and then basically call a reverse shell, and that reverse shell then gave us obviously a RC remotely as the administrator or entity authority system user. And then now we can go ahead to cd users admin administrator desktop. And now we can go ahead and type root.txt and boom. Cool, so there we go. So hopefully you learned something. If you did, like, comment, subscribe. This is quite a fairly straightforward box, but lots of potential rabbit holes, lots of bits and pieces where you'd be a bit unsure, but honestly keep at it, keep messing around, learn different techniques, watch other people do this kind of stuff, and you will learn very quickly. Cool, well, I will see you in the next one. Take care everyone, thanks, bye.